I had always considered myself pretty tech-savvy, cautious with my personal information, and vigilant about online security. But nothing could have prepared me for what was about to unfold. I thought I was just dealing with a neighborhood dispute, maybe a nuisance at worst, but what I uncovered would change everything. It started on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, or so I thought. I had just finished a few hours of work from home, sipping my coffee, when I noticed something strange. My phone buzzed with a notification, an email, supposedly from my bank. I didn't think much of it at first. It was a common enough occurrence to get updates from them. But as I read the subject line, my heart dropped into my stomach. Unusual activity detected, immediate action required. I clicked the email open, and the rest of my world seemed to fall away. The message was clear. Someone had accessed my bank account, made unauthorized transactions, and worse, had changed some of my personal details. The first instinct that hit me was panic. I had been careful, so how had this happened? It took only a moment to realize something far more sinister was going on. Whoever was behind this wasn't just after my money. This was personal. I immediately called my bank's customer service, my mind racing as I tried to figure out who could have gotten past the security measures I had so carefully set up. But as I explained the situation to the representative, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just some random hacker. I had an unsettling thought, a feeling creeping into the back of my mind. Karen. Karen was my neighbor, and at first, she had seemed like just another overly involved homeowner association president, always showing up uninvited to community events and offering unsolicited advice. But over time, I had started to realize that Karen wasn't the harmless neighbor she appeared to be. She was obsessed with controlling everything and everyone around her, using her position in the HOA as a platform to impose her own rules and make people's lives miserable. It started with small things, trivial complaints about lawn care, or me not trimming my hedge exactly to her liking. But as I tried to brush off her petty interference, it became clear that she wasn't satisfied with simply managing a neighborhood. She had a thirst for control that bordered on obsession, and I had become one of her targets. Little did I know, this would escalate into something far darker than I could have ever imagined. The hacking incident was just the beginning, and as I connected the dots, it became clear that Karen wasn't just using her power over the neighborhood. I suspected she was involved in something much deeper, something far more dangerous. I had no proof, of course, but there was a sick feeling in my gut that told me I was on the verge of uncovering something huge. The bank immediately froze my account while they investigated the breach, and I decided to dig deeper myself. I started combing through my digital accounts, checking for anything out of the ordinary. I looked into my social media accounts, which were all linked to my email, and that's when I found it. Someone had logged into my accounts using a new IP address, one that didn't match any of my devices. It wasn't just my bank account that had been compromised, it was everything. It was clear now that someone had access to my entire online presence. I tried to trace the IP address, using some basic tools to see where it led. The trail took me somewhere unexpected, a series of websites and pages, most of which were encrypted and seemingly untraceable. But there was one thing that stood out. A string of data linking the address to a network known for selling personal data on the dark web. That's when everything clicked. Karen had to be behind this. I had seen her using shady methods to get what she wanted before. But this was beyond anything I could have imagined. She had gone from petty neighbor complaints to something much, much worse. She had deep ties to the dark web, selling personal data, buying and selling information, and who knows what else. I spent hours researching the dark web, and for the first time, realized just how far Karen's influence could stretch. What I had thought was a petty HOA dispute had turned into something far darker. She wasn't just controlling a neighborhood. She was involved in criminal activity that spanned the globe. I had to act fast. I wasn't just dealing with a petty thief anymore. I was dealing with someone who had access to the kind of dangerous connections that could ruin lives. I couldn't just sit back and let her get away with it. But I couldn't confront her directly. Karen was too dangerous. I needed to be smart. The first thing I did was reach out to a trusted friend, Mark, who worked in cybersecurity. He was the only person I could think of who might help me get to the bottom of this without drawing attention to myself. Mark was hesitant at first, but once I explained the situation, he agreed to help. We began tracing the digital footprint, mapping out the web of connections that Karen had built over the years. What we discovered was horrifying. It turned out that Karen wasn't just hacking into my accounts. She had been targeting dozens of people in the neighborhood, gathering information, selling it on the dark web. She had access to everything: names, credit card numbers, social security numbers. And she was selling it all to the highest bidder. Her connections ran deep, and they were far more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't just about money or control anymore. Karen was using the neighborhood's data as currency, leveraging it to make millions in the shadows. She wasn't just a manipulative HOA president. She was a criminal mastermind. I knew I had to expose her, but I had to be careful. This was no longer a simple neighborhood dispute. This was a global web of corruption, and the last thing I wanted was to be dragged into it. But I also knew that if I didn't act, Karen would continue to destroy lives, using her power to manipulate and exploit everyone around her. The next step was clear. I needed to go to the authorities, but I couldn't go to them with just a hunch. I had to present them with undeniable proof that Karen wasn't just a petty hacker. She was a major player in a far-reaching criminal network. But the question was, how could I get that proof without tipping off Karen? That's when I made my move. I knew that Karen had been using her position in the HOA to keep tabs on people's personal lives. She had access to private records and data that most people didn't even know existed. I began collecting everything I could find. I used my access to public records, analyzed financial transactions, and pieced together the puzzle. I also did something I had never done before. I infiltrated Karen's online network. With Mark's help, I set up a virtual persona, someone who could access the same dark web connections Karen was using. It was risky, but if I could get close enough, I could trace her every move, expose her ties to the criminal underworld, and finally bring her down. The pieces were coming together. But just as I thought I had everything in place, I received an unexpected message, a warning. It was from an anonymous source, someone who claimed to have information about Karen's operation. The message was clear. You're on the right track, but be careful. She knows you're coming for her. The warning hit me hard. I wasn't just dealing with an ordinary criminal. I was up against someone who had eyes everywhere, who was always one step ahead. Karen was watching, and she wasn't going to let me expose her without a fight. I stared at the message, my heart racing. It was one thing to know that Karen was dangerous. It was another thing entirely to realize that she had been keeping track of my every move. The anonymous warning made me feel exposed, vulnerable. She knew I was getting closer, and now she was going to fight back harder than ever. I took a deep breath and reminded myself that I had already come this far. I couldn't back down now. I had to keep pushing, no matter how risky it seemed. But I knew I couldn't do this alone anymore. I needed to act quickly, and that meant involving the right people. I called Sarah, explained the situation, and filled her in on the message I had received. She was just as shocked as I was. "She's clearly onto you," Sarah said. "But we have the evidence now. If we go public, we can force her hand. She can't keep hiding forever." I agreed, but the looming threat of retaliation weighed heavily on my mind. Karen had made it clear that she wasn't afraid to pull strings and use her connections to silence anyone who posed a threat to her. But I couldn't let that stop me. I wasn't about to let her get away with this, especially after everything I had uncovered. Sarah suggested we start by getting everything documented and ready for a public release. We would gather all the evidence we had, including the financial transactions, the hacked data, and Karen's dark web connections, and we'd bring it to the authorities. Once the public knew the truth, Karen wouldn't be able to cover it up. The next day, I gathered all the documents, screenshots, and digital records I had. I spent hours organizing everything into a comprehensive file, laying out the case step by step. The extent of Karen's manipulation was staggering. She had gone beyond just petty fines and neighborhood disputes. She had been running a massive network that spanned far beyond the HOA. Sarah and I met at her office to finalize the presentation. As we worked, the atmosphere was tense. The weight of the situation was impossible to ignore. The more we uncovered, the more we realized just how deep Karen's influence went. This wasn't just about exposing a corrupt HOA president. This was about unraveling a criminal empire. Once we had everything prepared, we contacted a journalist who had been covering similar stories of corruption in the city. She was known for her investigative work and had a reputation for taking down powerful figures. I wasn't sure if she would take us seriously, but when I sent her the file, she responded almost immediately. "I'll meet you tomorrow," she wrote back. "This is big. I'll make sure it gets out." The relief I felt was overwhelming. Finally, we were going to do what I thought was impossible: expose Karen's entire operation. But even as I started to feel a sense of victory, a cold, unsettling thought crept into my mind. What if Karen had already anticipated this? What if she was prepared for this exact move? The thought made my stomach turn, but I couldn't afford to think like that now. The next day, we met with the journalist. She took one look at the evidence, her eyes widening as she scanned the details. "This is explosive," she said. "You've got everything here. I'll make sure this is investigated properly. But we need to move fast. If Karen's as connected as you say, we might be running out of time." We agreed to her plan. She would start working with the authorities, making sure everything was locked down and ready for a public release. But as the hours passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen wasn't done. She was still out there, plotting, waiting for the right moment to strike. That night, I got a call, this time from an unfamiliar number. My heart skipped a beat as I answered. "Don't do this." Karen's voice came through, distorted but unmistakable. "You think you're exposing me, but you're only digging your own grave. You don't understand the game I'm playing. You don't know what I'm capable of." Her words sent a chill down my spine. It was the same threatening tone, the same arrogance that I had heard from her before. But this time, I didn't feel fear. Instead, I felt anger. The kind of anger that only comes when you know you've been wronged and you're finally in a position to fight back. "You've already lost, Karen," I said, my voice steady. "The truth is out now. No matter what you do, you can't erase it." I hung up before she could respond, feeling a surge of adrenaline. We were too close now. There was no going back. The journalist began working with the authorities, and the investigation into Karen's criminal activities took off. The media picked up on the story, and soon, neighbors who had been afraid to speak out were coming forward with their own testimonies. Karen's grip on the neighborhood started to crumble as the full extent of her manipulation came to light. But despite everything, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen was still lurking in the shadows, waiting for her chance to strike. The investigation was moving forward, but she had made it clear that she wasn't going down without a fight. The public exposure was just the beginning, and I had a feeling Karen had one final card to play. As I sat in my living room that evening, watching the news unfold, I realized just how far Karen had gone to cover up her tracks. She had used the dark web, manipulated the HOA, and even hacked into people's personal accounts. She had tried to ruin lives, destroy reputations, and make millions in the process. And now it was all coming down. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. I opened the door to find Sarah standing there, a grim expression on her face. "They're moving," she said, her voice tense. "Karen's making her escape. We need to act fast." The urgency in Sarah's voice cut through the tension in the room. I felt a surge of adrenaline. The walls had started to close in on Karen, and now she was trying to make a break for it. I had come so far in exposing her, and the thought of her escaping now made my blood run cold. "They're moving, as in leaving the city?" I asked, barely able to grasp the full weight of what she was telling me. Sarah nodded. "She's trying to flee. The authorities are getting ready to raid some of her other properties, but I think she's planning to skip town before they can get to her." Her eyes were dark with concern. "If we don't stop her now, she could disappear for good. She knows she's losing. She won't let that happen without a fight." I clenched my fists, the anger rising in my chest. Karen had ruined so many lives, and now she was trying to slip away. After everything she'd done, I couldn't let her get away. Not now. Not when she was so close to being exposed. "Let's go," I said firmly, grabbing my keys. "We can't waste any more time. We need to make sure she doesn't slip through the cracks." Sarah didn't need any more convincing. We jumped into our cars and headed toward Karen's last known property. The streets felt different now, charged with a sense of urgency. I had always thought of the neighborhood as a quiet, peaceful place, But now, it felt like the backdrop for a thriller. A showdown was coming, and I wasn't sure how it would end, but I was determined to see it through. As we drove, my mind raced through every possible outcome. Karen had connections in high places, and if she was trying to disappear, she might have a network set up to help her. But she couldn't hide forever. The truth was out, and the police were moving in on her empire. She couldn't erase what we had uncovered. We arrived at the property, Karen's mansion, the place where all her schemes had been masterminded. It stood there like a fortress, its walls tall and imposing. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into something bigger than I had ever imagined. "I'll keep an eye on the front," Sarah whispered, her voice steady. "You go around back. We need to be discreet." I nodded and moved quietly toward the side of the house. Every step felt deliberate, every movement watched. It was hard to shake the feeling that Karen had eyes everywhere, but I knew I had to push forward. She had built this network on secrecy and manipulation, but I wasn't going to let her hide anymore. As I crept along the edge of the property, I heard voices in the distance. My heart skipped a beat as I recognized one of the voices. It was Karen. She was talking to someone. I had to get closer. I silently moved toward the back entrance of the house, trying to stay as hidden as possible. As I peered through a small crack in the door, I saw Karen standing in the living room, speaking to a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, dressed in a dark suit, and had an air of authority about him. "You don't understand, do you?" Karen was saying, her voice tight with frustration. "They think they've won, but they haven't seen the full picture. The truth will never come out. I won't let them destroy everything I've built." I felt a chill run down my spine. It was clear now. Karen had no intention of giving up. She was preparing to make a stand, to use whatever resources she had left to ensure she stayed in control. But I had one thing she didn't, the truth. I signaled to Sarah, motioning for her to move in. She joined me quickly, and together, we waited as the conversation continued. The man in the room with Karen wasn't just a bodyguard or a lackey. He was someone important, someone who could make this whole situation worse if Karen managed to convince him to help her escape. But then I saw it. On the coffee table in front of them was a flash drive. The size of it was unremarkable, but I knew exactly what it was, evidence. It had to be. Karen had always been meticulous about keeping her secrets, but now, she was careless. She had left her life's work exposed. I needed that drive. With the man still distracted by Karen's ramblings, I took my chance. Quietly, I moved toward the door and carefully slid the flash drive into my pocket. The risk of being caught was immense, but I knew this was the key to finishing everything. I glanced at Sarah, who was waiting for my signal. We had what we came for. Now it was time to go. As we quietly retreated, I could hear the conversation continue behind us. Karen and her associate had no idea we had just stolen the one thing that could bring her down once and for all. We made our way back to the car, hearts pounding. "We've got it," I said, barely able to contain the excitement. "This is the proof we need. It's over." Sarah looked at me, a knowing smile creeping onto her face. "It's not over yet. We still need to get it to the authorities before Karen can wipe everything. But we're one step closer." Once we were back at my place, I connected the flash drive to my computer, cautiously pulling up the files. The data on it was staggering. Bank transactions, shell companies, even encrypted communications between Karen and her criminal network. I knew that once the authorities saw this, Karen would have no way out. This wasn't just about fines or manipulation anymore. It was about a full-blown criminal operation that spanned far beyond the HOA. But even as I stared at the documents, I knew Karen wasn't going to go down without a fight. This would be the moment of truth. I had what I needed to expose her, but I had no idea how far she would go to keep everything hidden. As much as I wanted to feel relief, I knew the battle was far from over. As I sat in front of the computer, staring at the files on the flash drive, a sense of urgency gripped me. The evidence was undeniable. Everything I had suspected about Karen was now in black and white. There was no way she could explain this away. But I also knew that Karen wasn't just going to roll over. She had too much at stake, and I had no doubt she'd try to cover her tracks, destroy the evidence, or even eliminate the people who could bring her down. Sarah had already contacted the authorities, but I couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. If Karen found out I had this, she'd do anything to get it back. I had to act fast. I printed the files, making multiple copies to ensure that no matter what happened, there was a backup. But just as I was about to make one final copy, I heard a noise outside, footsteps, sharp and deliberate. My heart skipped a beat, and I instinctively closed the laptop. I wasn't sure if it was just my nerves playing tricks on me, but I couldn't afford to take any chances. I rushed to the window and peeked through the blinds. There, standing outside, was the figure of a man. He wasn't looking directly at my house, but he was too close for comfort. His posture was tense, almost like he was waiting for something or someone. I couldn't make out his face, but I knew one thing for sure. He wasn't just some random passerby. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone was watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. Karen wasn't done yet, and neither were her people. I couldn't let them catch wind of what I had uncovered. I needed to get the files to the authorities, now. I grabbed the flash drive, shoved it into my pocket, and bolted for the door. My heart pounded as I rushed to my car, adrenaline fueling every step. The man outside hadn't noticed me yet, but I wasn't about to wait around to see if he would. As I drove through the streets, my mind raced. What if Karen's people were already onto me? What if they had tracked me to this point? The more I thought about it, the more I realized how dangerous this situation had become. I made my way to the police station, my hands gripping the steering wheel. Every second felt like an eternity. When I finally arrived, I was met by Detective Harris, a no-nonsense officer who had been investigating Karen's network with Sarah's help. He had been invaluable in pushing the case forward, and now, I needed him more than ever. "Do you have it?" he asked, his voice calm but filled with urgency. I nodded, handing him the flash drive. "Everything's on there," I said. "Bank accounts, shell companies, encrypted messages, everything you need to take her down." He took the drive, his expression serious. "We're going to move on this, but you need to be careful. Karen's not going to just let this go. If she's got connections, she'll use them. We'll do everything we can, but you need to lay low for a while." I agreed, my thoughts already spiraling. I had no intention of sitting back while Karen tried to escape the law. The thought of her getting away with everything, after everything she had done, was unacceptable. But as the detective walked away, I realized how much danger I was truly in. Karen wasn't just a neighborhood tyrant anymore. She had become a criminal mastermind with the power to destroy lives. That night, I received another message. It was from the same anonymous source who had warned me before. The message was simple but chilling. "You're too deep now. Karen's going to make sure you never see the light of day again." I felt my blood run cold as I read the words. The warning was clear. Karen knew I was coming for her, and she wasn't going to let me take her down without a fight. I had hoped that the authorities would handle things, but the message made it clear that I was still in danger. She was going to make sure I paid for what I had uncovered. I couldn't let fear control me. I had already come this far, and there was no turning back now. I had exposed Karen's secrets, but the real battle was just beginning. As much as I wanted to lay low and let the authorities take over, I knew I had to stay involved. The more I thought about Karen's criminal empire, the more I realized that she wouldn't stop until she had everything back under her control. The next few days were a blur. The authorities moved quickly, and Karen's network started to unravel. People she had been working with began to turn on her, and evidence kept pouring in. It seemed like everything was falling into place, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen was always one step ahead. Then, just when I thought we were closing in on her, I received a call that made my heart skip a beat. It was from Sarah. "They've got her," Sarah said, her voice thick with disbelief. "Karen's been arrested, but there's a catch. She's not alone. The network goes deeper than we thought. She's been working with some seriously dangerous people." My mind reeled. Karen's web was bigger than I had ever imagined, and now I realized just how high the stakes had become. She wasn't just a corrupt HOA president anymore. She was part of something much darker. And as much as I wanted to celebrate her arrest, I knew this wasn't over. The real battle was just beginning. I sat there, stunned, as Sarah's words echoed in my mind. Karen's arrest was just the beginning, but I hadn't realized how much deeper her involvement went. This wasn't just about fines and neighborhood disputes. Karen had built a criminal empire, and now, with her arrest, her network was crumbling. At least, that's what I thought. The authorities had barely begun to scratch the surface. "They've got her," Sarah had said, but her voice was strained, almost fearful. "But Karen's not alone in this. We thought it was just her manipulating the HOA, but she's been working with some people who are far more dangerous than we imagined. There are connections that go all the way to the top." The words hit me like a freight train. My mind raced, trying to make sense of everything. Karen had always seemed like just an annoying, power-hungry neighbor, but now I saw the bigger picture. She wasn't just a petty HOA president anymore. She was part of a much larger, more dangerous network that spanned far beyond our little neighborhood. "I can't believe it," I muttered, pacing around my room. "We thought we were taking her down. We thought we had all the evidence we needed. But now, we're just scratching the surface." Sarah's voice came through again, much quieter this time. "It's worse than we thought. She's been laundering money, making deals with people who have connections to the dark web. These aren't just local criminals. We've barely scratched the surface of what she's really been up to. The FBI is getting involved now." That sent a chill through me. The FBI. This had escalated to a level I hadn't even begun to comprehend. My pursuit of Karen was no longer just about exposing a corrupt HOA president. It was about uncovering a network of crime, corruption, and manipulation that reached far beyond anything I had imagined. "Where do we go from here?" I asked, my voice tinged with exhaustion. "What can we do now that we know the stakes are higher?" "There's no turning back now," Sarah replied. "We have to follow through. The FBI is already on it, but we can't stop now. We need to keep pushing for the truth. We need to make sure that all of Karen's actions come to light, and we need to figure out who else is involved." The weight of her words settled in, but I wasn't about to back down. Karen might have had powerful connections, but I had the truth, and that was something she could never take away. In the following days, things started moving quickly. The authorities began pulling in more people, interviewing neighbors and witnesses who had seen Karen's shady dealings. Her arrest had opened a floodgate, and the more the FBI uncovered, the more it became clear just how deep Karen's corruption went. But as the investigation unfolded, I realized that Karen wasn't the only one who needed to be exposed. There were others, people who had been working with her, helping her cover her tracks, and profiting off of the stolen information. The network of criminals that had supported Karen was sprawling, and the deeper we dug, the more connections we uncovered. One night, as I was reviewing the documents from the authorities, something in one of the financial records caught my eye. It was a small detail, something that had slipped through the cracks before, but now it seemed important. A series of transactions linked to Karen's offshore accounts were tied to an alias, someone I didn't recognize. The name was intentionally vague, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it meant something. Whoever this person was, they were at the center of a much larger operation. I quickly reached out to Sarah, sharing my findings. "There's someone else involved," I said, my voice shaky. "I don't know who they are, but their name keeps showing up in the financials. They're connected to Karen's offshore dealings, and they might be the key to unraveling this entire network." Sarah responded almost immediately. "We need to find out who they are, and fast. If Karen was involved in something that deep, it's only a matter of time before they start covering their tracks. We have to move before they disappear." The investigation had just taken a darker turn. I wasn't sure who this mysterious person was, but I was certain they were connected to something far more dangerous than anything I had encountered before. This wasn't just about Karen anymore. This was about a criminal network that could have implications far beyond the neighborhood, and I was determined to uncover every layer of it. The next day, I met with Sarah and a few of the authorities working on the case. We went over the records, trying to connect the dots. It wasn't easy. This person, the one tied to the offshore accounts, had covered their tracks well. But we kept pushing forward, and slowly, the pieces began to come together. The name on the account matched a company linked to several high-profile figures in the city. This company had ties to politicians, business leaders, and even tech companies with connections to the dark web. It was clear now. Karen had been just one piece of a much larger puzzle, and the further we dug, the more we realized just how high the stakes were. With the authorities on board, we worked tirelessly to track down the person behind the alias. It wasn't long before we found a lead, a known associate of Karen's who had been helping her launder money through various channels. We traced them to a private property on the outskirts of a city, a place that didn't show up on any public records. It was becoming increasingly clear that this wasn't just about a neighborhood HOA anymore. It was about exposing a criminal empire that spanned cities, maybe even countries. And I was standing at the center of it, holding the key to bringing it all down. As the investigation heated up, I knew we were getting closer to the truth. But I also knew that Karen wouldn't go down without a fight. The people she had aligned herself with were powerful, dangerous, and ruthless. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about stopping a network of criminals who had been hiding in plain sight. The closer we got to uncovering the full extent of Karen's operation, the more I realized just how dangerous this situation had become. As I sat in the dark, poring over the documents and connections that were starting to make sense, the weight of what I was about to uncover felt overwhelming. This was no longer just about her manipulating the HOA or stealing a few $1,000s. It was a web of corruption, money laundering, and criminal activity that reached far beyond anything I could have imagined. Sarah had been invaluable, pushing the investigation forward while I worked to connect the dots. But we knew we were dealing with people who had the means to cover their tracks. These weren't just petty criminals. They were well-connected, highly organized, and willing to do anything to protect their interests. I felt the tension in the air as the authorities began zeroing in on Karen's associates. They were now tracking down leads, piecing together how the network operated, and slowly but surely, they were uncovering a trail of financial records that pointed to even more powerful figures involved in the operation. Karen had been working with people who were pulling strings in real estate, tech, and even local government. It was clear that this was much bigger than I had anticipated. That's when I received another warning, and this time, it was different. The message wasn't cryptic or vague like the others. It was direct, almost personal. Stop now. You've uncovered enough. Karen and her associates won't let this go on any longer. You'll regret it. The message was unsettling, but it didn't stop me. If anything, it made me more determined. These people weren't going to intimidate me. I had already come this far, and there was no turning back. But I couldn't ignore the growing danger either. Karen had made it clear that she had resources at her disposal, resources that I had underestimated. As the authorities continued their investigation, Sarah and I kept a low profile, doing everything we could to stay ahead of Karen and her network. We had the evidence, but I knew we couldn't bring it all to light until the right moment. The last thing I wanted was to give Karen a chance to destroy the evidence or to flee the city before she could be arrested. One evening, as I was reviewing the latest batch of financial records, a knock on the door startled me. My heart skipped a beat, and for a moment I froze, unsure of who could be standing on the other side. Slowly, I opened the door, only to find a man standing there, holding an envelope. He didn't say anything, just handed me the envelope and walked away, without a word. I quickly shut the door and opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a short, handwritten note. You're getting too close. This is your final warning. Stop digging, or you'll regret it. I stared at the note for a long moment, feeling the weight of the threat. Karen was getting desperate, and it seemed like she was pulling out all the stops. This wasn't just about protecting her money anymore. It was about protecting her freedom. And now, I was the one standing in her way. I couldn't let this stop me. I had come too far to back down now, but I knew I had to be more careful. If Karen was watching me this closely, I needed to cover my tracks even better. I met Sarah the next day, and we went over the latest information we had gathered. It was clear that we were running out of time. The authorities were close, but Karen was getting more aggressive. I wasn't sure how much longer we had before she would make a move to cover her tracks completely. We need to go public, Sarah said, her voice full of resolve. The longer we wait, the more time Karen has to erase everything. We can't let her escape now. I agreed, but I was nervous. Going public with this would be risky, and Karen was dangerous. But I knew it had to be done. We couldn't keep living in fear of her threats. It was time to expose her, once and for all. That night, we released everything, files, evidence, records, everything that linked Karen to her criminal network. We contacted the media, the authorities, and anyone else who could help us get the word out. The moment we pressed send, I felt a rush of relief. It was done. We had exposed her. But as I sat there, watching the news reports, my phone buzzed with a new message. I didn't recognize the number, but I knew it was from someone connected to Karen. You think you've won, but you're playing a dangerous game. You've made a lot of enemies, and you won't survive this. Not if you don't stop now. The threat was clear, and I couldn't deny the fear that crept into my chest. Karen wasn't done. She was angry, and she wasn't going to let this go easily. But I had made my choice. I wasn't going to back down now. The truth was out, and I had nothing left to lose. The next few days felt like a blur. After releasing the evidence and getting it into the hands of the authorities and media, I expected a sense of relief. But all I felt was a lingering anxiety, a tension that never seemed to lift. Every time my phone buzzed or I heard a knock on the door, my heart would race. Karen's threat still hung in the air like a heavy cloud, and I knew she wouldn't stop until she had taken control again. The media had picked up the story, and the pressure on Karen was mounting. The evidence we had exposed was undeniable. Karen's web of lies was unraveling quickly, and the authorities had begun questioning her associates. She had nowhere to hide. But even as things started to go in our favor, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen had one final move left. The deeper I dug into her life, the more I realized she wasn't the type to go down without a fight. She had always found a way to maintain control, and now she was desperate. I received another message later that evening. This time, it was an email, and it wasn't just another threat. It was a warning that Karen had started covering her tracks. The authorities had raided one of her properties, and there was a good chance she would try to flee the city. The email included details of her plan, a list of properties she was trying to liquidate and move assets from. It seemed like a tip-off, and for a moment, I wondered who sent it. Was it someone inside Karen's circle trying to sabotage her? Or was it just another ploy to make me think I was being watched? I immediately forwarded the email to Sarah and the authorities. The urgency of the situation hit me hard. If Karen managed to leave town before the authorities could catch up with her, she'd slip through the cracks again, just like she always had. She had too many connections, and if she went underground, there was no telling how long it would take to find her again. The authorities moved fast, coordinating efforts to track her movements. But despite their best efforts, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Karen was already one step ahead. She had to be. She was too clever to let something like this happen without a plan B. The following morning, I went to the local coffee shop, trying to clear my head for a moment. I hadn't been out of the house in days, and the weight of everything was starting to get to me. As I sat at a table, scrolling through the latest news reports, I felt my phone buzz again. Another message, but this time it was different. It was from Sarah. "We need to meet ASAP. Karen is planning something huge. The next step is underway. She's not gone yet." I felt my pulse quicken as I read the words. I knew this wasn't going to be over until we had her locked up for good. I quickly grabbed my things, heading to the meeting spot we had set earlier. I could already feel the weight of the situation pressing down on me again. Karen wasn't backing down. This wasn't a fight that could be won with evidence alone. She had resources, and I had to be smarter if I was going to catch her. When I arrived, Sarah was already waiting. She looked serious, more serious than I had seen her before. "She's making her move," Sarah said, her voice quiet but urgent. "We've traced her transactions. She's in the process of moving the majority of her assets out of the country. The longer we wait, the harder it'll be to get her." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. I wasn't just worried about Karen escaping. I was worried about what she could do with all the information we had. We had uncovered her entire operation, but if she managed to erase it all before we could make the arrests, it would be like nothing had ever happened. "We can't let her get away," I said, my voice firm. "We need to act now, before she's gone for good." We worked quickly, contacting the authorities again, providing them with the latest data. The plan was simple: trap her before she could finalize her escape. But as I watched the authorities mobilize, I couldn't help but wonder how much time we had left. How long would it take for her to get out of the country? Would we catch her in time? Then came the call. The one we had been waiting for. The authorities had found her. She wasn't at the property she had been planning to flee from, but they had traced her to a hidden safe house in a different part of town. It wasn't a mansion or a high-profile building. This was a place she had been hiding in plain sight, a place where no one would expect to find her. I got in the car with Sarah, both of us racing to the location. We weren't sure what we would find when we got there, but I could feel the weight of the moment. This was the culmination of everything we had worked for, and it all led to this final confrontation. We arrived at the address, and my stomach twisted. The house was old, run down, and hidden in a neighborhood where no one paid much attention to the small details. It seemed like the perfect place for someone like Karen, someone who needed to blend in while keeping their back covered. The authorities were already setting up, preparing to raid the house. As we waited, I felt the tension mounting. Karen had been a step ahead this entire time, but now it was our turn. She had nowhere left to run. The evidence was too overwhelming, the connections too vast. She was going to have to face the consequences of everything she had done. As the team moved in, I couldn't help but feel a rush of satisfaction. We had uncovered her secrets, exposed her dark web ties, and brought her to justice. This was the end of her reign, and nothing was going to stop it now. Make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more updates. The story may be nearing its end, but there's still so much more to uncover. Stay tuned,